Welcome, everyone. Good to have you here. Thanks for coming. Got some of our attendees filing in. We'll wait till everyone gets in and gets settled before we get started. So, Natalia, Kate, Michael, good to see you. Michael, do you go by Michael?
Yes, I go by Michael.
Okay, got it. How many people try to call you Mike?
Oh, so many people. It's actually fine with me. My family calls me Mike, but no one else besides that.
Okay. It's always key when someone says no one else besides my family. That's like the that's like the red line.
The boundary is there.
It's set up. Natalia, are you in your campus office or are you at home?
No, I'm in my campus office.
Okay. I love all the books behind you. They're beautiful. And Kate, how about you?
I am sort of home. I have an ADU behind my house that is for my mom. But she is not here right now, and it's a quiet place for me to do this meeting with you all. So that's where I am.
Well, I love your artwork in particular.
Yep. My niece made this for my mom.
Did you do that?
No, my niece made it.
Oh, your niece did.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my favorite kind of artwork these days.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we've got families on board, and I just want to thank everyone for coming and joining us for faculty office hours. Based on registrations, I know that some of you are packed in tightly around either a telephone or a computer screen with your parents or your siblings or your friends watching us. And so I just appreciate you making time if you're coming from the East Coast where it's 8 o'clock at night and you're joining us. Amazing. And I know some of you are actually coming from overseas. And so it is 5 o'clock here in Portland, and the session is going to last 45, 50 minutes. But before I begin, I'm going to have, well, you know what? I'll introduce myself. My name is Miljan Trulove. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid here at Reed College. And I'm here with some of my faculty colleagues. And I'm going to ask that they first introduce themselves, that they let you know what department they're in, and talk about their tenure here at Reed, but in particular, what their emphasis is within the department, because I always think that's fairly interesting. And why don't we go in alphabetical order? And Kate, that makes you first.
That's me. Hi, my name is Kate Duffly. I teach in the theater department here at Reed. Um, and my area of expertise, I do a lot of different things in the department. So I'm the performance studies scholar in the department, which is performance studies is an interdisciplinary study that takes performance as a lens for looking at human behavior. So that includes a lot of things, as you might imagine. My particular area of interest is in theater for social change and community-based performance. Um, I teach classes in all of those areas, and I also direct theater. So I teach class on directing, and I direct some of our main stage shows. I directed a production this fall called Everybody by Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, which was a or is a contemporary adaptation of a medieval morality play. And I'm happy to say more about that later. It was a pretty fun show. Um, yeah, did I answer your questions, Million? I feel like I might have. Okay, great. Welcome.
Uh, Michael, why don't you go next?
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Pearce. I am an assistant professor of statistics within our Department of Mathematics and Statistics. So here at Reed, we're a joint department. That means that if you take our courses, you can kind of easily go between all the different ideas of mathematics and statistics and see how they're interrelated. I'm specifically a Bayesian statistician, which is a paradigm of statistics in which we not only work with data as sort of all statisticians do, but we also can directly incorporate existing knowledge or prior knowledge about what's going on in the system. And that usually helps us kind of like get towards what we think to be perhaps a more fine-tuned estimate of what's going on in the system. In terms of actual applications or contexts that I work in, I mostly focus in studying ordinal data. So anything in which you have like ordered comparisons, a ranking is a really classic example of this. So some of my recent work is exploring the theory behind ranked choice voting. It's in making comparisons between different medical treatments if they've been sort of ranked in different studies. And even in analyzing sports data, because you can think of like the outcome of, say, a basketball game as an ordered comparison between two teams. So I work in a wide variety of contexts with ordered data.
Thanks, Mike.
And my name is Nathalia King, and I teach in the English department. I also teach in the comparative literature program, and I teach Humanities 110. My areas of interest, particularly at this point in my career, I would say, have to do with relations between texts and images and how different sort of sign systems uh, relate to each other and how they differently communicate to us. So I teach a course, for example, that's called Word and Image that looks at a broad array of different kinds of texts, from, for example, Plains Indian ledger books to contemporary graphic novel. And I teach a course on description and narration, which takes a long, hard look at descriptions in long novels and how the micro narratives in those areas of the novel might be different or relate to the longer um, teleology of the plot as a whole.
Oh, that is so interesting. So how do variances and micro narratives impact the story?
Um, in lots and lots of ways. I mean, and obviously it depends on it depends on the particular novel. Um, but I think there are many instances in which a micro narrative is a kind of qualification or a modification or even a contradiction to what's happening in the narrative as a whole. So for many writers, I think descriptions can be ways of complicating what the plot of the novel is saying.
Intentionally?
Yes, 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 drawing
Wow.
attention to some particular form of complication.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all for sharing that. This is and to let our families know, and many more of you have arrived. So thanks again for coming. I'll just reintroduce myself. My name is Billian Trulove. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. And you're coming to us from all over the country, and you're here for faculty office hours, a chance to really get to know some of our faculty who many of you students will be working closely with. To learn more about those relationships, to learn more about these areas of discipline. You have a function that will allow you to interact with us through questions and answers. So if you have any questions that come up over the course of this session, please feel free to drop them in. What I'm going to do while we're speaking is sort of combine some of these to make sure that we can get as many of those answered as possible. And so some of them you won't actually see come up specifically, but you should be able to gather the content based on some of the questions I posed to our panelists. But do make use of that to communicate and let us know anything that you'd like clarification on. But I just want to start off for our faculty. We have folks who are looking at Reed as an option. And here's the thing. A lot of small private colleges say something like, you'll get to know your professor. And they say it so much that it almost doesn't really mean anything. And it becomes kind of hard for high school students to imagine what it means to get to know my professor. And so I'd like to ask you all a question. If think about some of the first year students you've worked with that you met their first year, that you continue to work with later in their career, how did that relationship actually form? Were they invited? Were they in a class? Did they formally come up to you and talk to you and say, I want to be involved in your area of study in a particular way? Can you help our students? Can you tell a story about how that has happened for you in terms of connecting with one of your students?
I think I can say that for me, that happens mostly by virtue of teaching Humanities 110, which is the first year course that's required of all Reed students. In that context, I'll have somewhere between 14 and 17 students for the entire year. It's a great opportunity to get to know those people really well. And we have a tool we call the paper conference, which is maybe my favorite way of getting to know people. Students write papers, and in addition to getting written comments on each of those papers, they come in and we have a conversation that lasts, 20 minutes, maybe a lot longer, about uh, what the argument of the paper is and what kind of evidence has been used to support that argument and how good the connection between the two is. And that's, for me, that's really an extraordinary opportunity to get to know individual persons, individual students, and to get to know something about how the mind of that particular student works. It's a great, I can ask, well, what's the argument of the paper? Then I can see that there's a substantial difference between the words on the page and the words that are being uttered. And that gives me insight into, why there's this difference. And that's something that I can really work with. And I think that the relationship that emerges from that, the relation of trust, the relation of mutual interest that emerges from that really carries through. Many of Hume students will take sophomore level courses, junior courses, and some of them will end up writing thesis with me.
And Natalia, what's a thesis?
What's a thesis? No, a thesis is a Hume paper on a large scale.
Green paper plus.
At least in English or Complet. I'm sure a thesis in statistics or theater is something else, but yeah, it's a series, maybe a series of shorter papers cobbled together.
Hmm. And a culmination of their college experience in many ways, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Natalia, for going first. That gave me a chance to think a little bit. And as you were talking, I was thinking, I just thought back on a number of different relationships that I've developed with students, and I realized that working with students on theatrical productions is one of the ways that I get to know students the best. So we have two main stage productions every year in the theater department, one in the fall and one in the spring, and then we have multiple senior thesis productions as well. Those are directed by students and designed by students. And I think it is working on those that I have often gotten to know students. But that relationship kind of gets built on in other ways. So when we're working together in a theatrical production, we really treat everybody as a collaborator. We approach theater making not as this kind of like as hierarchical as it can be in some models, with the director kind of at the top, but really that all of the people participating are collaborators in making this thing. And so there's faculty and staff and students all collaborating together to kind of create this final product. Part of what we do together is we begin by most often we're starting with the text. Sometimes there's a devised process where you're not starting with a pre-existing text, but most often we're starting with a play and we read that play really carefully together. And then we work together to figure out how do we make this text, how do we embody this text and bring it to life on stage. And so there's both this kind of like scholarly academic conversation that's happening, but also this artistic one and this collaborative one. How do we cooperate together? How do we really listen to each other's opinions and incorporate them? And then often I have those same students again in a classroom setting, as my advisees. And so it is this kind of like layering of like building upon that relationship. But I think for me in the theater department, it really often begins in a theatrical production, which I should say are open to anybody. So it's not just theater majors who are doing that, but anybody in the college, regardless of your major, can participate in one of our productions. And many people do.
So in statistics, I guess I think about how I've seen students kind of, over the course of our different, offerings. So, in the intro level courses, I work with students kind of one-on-one through office hours and having conversations, formally, informally. And a really important aspect of that course is working on a project in which students, analyze some real data and they think about a real meaningful question. And oftentimes, or really, an important required aspect of that is thinking about sort of like the ethical considerations of their study and how that fits into like a broader or applied discipline. And something that's really fantastic about being at Reed is that then I usually see these students come back to my 200 and 300 level more advanced courses, and all of a sudden they're more mature statisticians because they've taken more classes, but they also have so much more experience from around the college, oftentimes in a different major, and then they bring that contextual knowledge like to the 200 and 300 level course, and in that way not only do I think they sort of get tools from statistics that maybe they can use within their other disciplines. But I also get quite a bit of information from that too, because I get to see sort of the skills that they've learned in these other disciplines and the ways of thinking that are different from my sort of domain's way of thinking. So I think that's something really fantastic. So in that way, like I think the way I interact with students, kind of coming back to the question, is really one that's quite symbiotic. And that's just because of the nature of my discipline. It's really strengthened by the fact that we work with other scientists or scholars on their problems.
And so, some of you may have heard me talk to Michael when you first jump on. I said, does everyone always call you Michael, or do some people call you Mike? But some of those people are also students, which is another unique feature that sometimes students have to get used to, is that we go by our first name around here. And so, what does that do for that relationship? The fact that students come up and they say, "Hey, Kate, how are you? What's going on?"
Hopefully it makes me more approachable. Um, hmm. What does that do for that relationship? Yeah, hopefully it makes it me more approachable. Hopefully we are again, I think for me it comes back to the collaborator thing and kind of moving away from in the theatrical context, thinking about this kind of top-down model of theater making with the director at the top. Um, I really am interested in my students as fellow collaborators, and I really want to hear what their ideas are and the connections that they're making. Um, so yeah, I guess maybe that's my beginning of an answer to that question.
Mhm. Yeah.
I would say it really cultivates a relationship between where, faculties and students are peers as opposed to being, like, as Kate was saying, part of a hierarchy. There's such a big difference between my being called Professor King. I mean, it doesn't even ring right to me, and being called Nathalia. When I'm called Nathalia, it registers as if I were a real person in the real world among other real people. And I think it really, this name, the first name basis really helps us to see each other as real people in a real world, to take each other as human beings. Um, and I don't think of myself necessarily, I mean, I have some expertise, but that doesn't seem to me to be the most important part of teaching. The most important part of teaching for me is really listening to what students have to say, their reactions to the text, their readings of the text, their understandings of the text, and then maybe a capacity to ask a question that opens some aspect of that reading up.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said, and I kind of echo Natalia's last point there that I think that it does create a certain level of like welcomeness and openness in the classroom, and students will ask questions or share ideas that I maybe they wouldn't feel so comfortable if we were sort of under a more top down approach. So I think it's quite nice that it flattens our classroom environment a bit.
Well, I also think it's interesting because one of the things I talk about is in terms of our outputs is our PhD production. The fact that, so many people move on to become scholars, but I don't hear anything about we're doing that because, to make it difficult, but we're doing that by connecting with people. Can you all talk about how you make sure that the students we have here leave Reed knowing something in terms of your field of expertise? That might be pedagogy, it might be an approach, or it might be a philosophy. But, students come here with really clear intentions about some future. How do we make sure that they acquire that during their Reed experience?
I would say that in most departments, pedagogy is scaffolded. For example, if Hume 110 is the first course in which you write papers and think about them critically and maybe revise them, that's something that you then build on in 200 level and 300 level courses. Most people in a junior year take some version of a junior qual, which asks for a fairly high degree of expertise, actually, in terms of reading a theoretical argument, a fictional text, and a poetic text. So it asks people to understand, to know, and to be able to use a critical vocabulary, particular vocabulary. And then that's carried forward, I think, into the senior year, um, particularly in relation to the senior thesis, which is generally a project that has a substantial amount of research embedded in it. So a dialogue with other scholars from other parts of the world.
I want to echo what Nathalia is saying about the scaffolding piece. That's definitely something we think about a lot in the theater department. We teach both, theory and practice classes, classes that we consider studio classes and classes that are conference-based classes. Learning is scaffolded, I think, in different ways in each of those contexts. But for example, some of our students hope to direct a production in their senior year as part of their senior thesis. Before we say yes to that, they have taken a directing class. They have also assisted on one of the main stage productions, a faculty member or a professional guest director. And so they've sort of had a class where they're learning some of the basics of what it means to be a director. And then they've had the opportunity to sit next to a professional director, to be in the room with the rest of the production team and sort of see how that is run before they're then asked to take the lead and sit kind of in the driver's seat of their own project their senior year.
Yeah, in math and statistics, I think our goal is to try to make sure that the intro level courses really start students off by getting a sense of what the discipline like truly looks like. And I think this is actually quite a unique pedagogical approach. So oftentimes, if you're like a math major, the first class you might take in college would be calculus, and oftentimes that class looks a lot like you have a bunch of problems in front of you and you sort of calculate answers over and over again. Maybe you apply theorems or ideas and you sort of do those calculations. Of course, professional mathematicians don't actually do calculations all day. They really think about sort of theoretical ideas and they prove theorems and they work with things that are slightly more abstract. And our introductory course, even in calculus, is one that is not only about calculations, but really about proving the ideas behind calculus. I think that same thing is actually true in statistics. Statisticians, they work with models, they calculate p-values, but they also work with data that's really complex and messy and not so tightly formatted. And in our intro course, we really emphasize that. We think about how to work with data through code and computation, and we also work with the theoretical ideas. So that's not to say that we start everyone off with like PhD level problems. Of course, we start small and we scaffold up, as Kate and Nathalia were talking about. But I think that we sort of train students to go on and maybe get a graduate degree in statistics or become a professional statistician by showing them what the field looks like right from the very beginning.
This is a great question, and I'm going to ask it of all of you. It's sort of a two-parter, and feel free to be brief. For you, Nathalia, the question is, what's your favorite book to teach? I'm sickly curious if it's also your favorite book in general. Kate, for you, what is your favorite play to deconstruct or teach on? And then also, what's your favorite play? And Michael, I suppose for you, it'd be like, what's your favorite number? All right. You can tell us what your favorite mathematical concept is and what you like to teach on.
It's an impossible question. I have way too many favorite to answer that. But I would say, like right now, this semester, among the favorite books that I'm teaching is Faulkner's Absalom, which is the story of, in some sense, the explication of the rise of a character who is really a white supremacist and the complexities of other characters' relations with him.
This is an impossible question, but I'll just say the first one that came to mind, which actually was a surprise to me. So I teach a class, Race and Identity in American Theater. We cover a lot of plays and concepts in that class. We're sort of looking primarily from this theater in the 60s to now in American theater. And one of my favorite I tend to like weird plays, kind of non-linear, more abstracted plays. But the play that came to mind is actually Lorraine Hansberry's Raisin in the Sun. I love teaching that in the context of this class. I think it's such a well-structured play, and it also touches on so many bigger issues. She's really it's this very moving story about a family, a Black family, and it also deals with kind of broader structural political issues like redlining. So it's a great play to both kind of think about the canon of American theater and then also look at other political and social issues that connect to the theatrical context.
So even though I don't usually teach books, I'm actually going to answer this question with a book that I like to teach. So there's this book written by Kathy O'Neill in I think the mid 2010s called Weapons of Math Destruction. So math instead of math. And it's a book that's specifically talking about sort of the way in which, algorithms, predictive algorithms, machine learning, AI sort of have pretty severe ethical implications and equity implications for society. And that book was really written, pre the AI revolution. But now it feels like even more, say, prescient over what's going on in our society. So that's a really fantastic book. Quite a tough read sometimes.
When do y'all have students just blow your mind with some of the stuff? You're in conversations, and I have an idea that these might happen more often than what I might even imagine. But what are those conversations like that build on to each other? And then, Michael, I have a question for you. I just want you to think about this while we wait for that. Folks are sort of curious about the flexibility of the math curriculum, in terms of classes that people have taken before they've arrived here, and also how people might be engaged in independent research. So, just one or two people for the first question, but then I'd love you to answer that.
So I would say this happens regularly at Reed, that a student blows your mind in all kinds of ways. But this just happened to me the other day. I give students the option of doing some creative work, like doing a kind of creative piece, even though the courses I teach are critical and analytical. And so we were reading Freud, and this was a student who did a kind of photo essay in which they explored how the dynamics of repression, as Freud describes them, relate to social media. And the student was arguing that in social media, in our use of social media, repression, there are ways in which social media liberate all kinds of inhibitions. When you think of, maybe especially the circulation of pornography in social media would be an extreme example. But there are also lift inhibitions, but also create inhibitions. And so the student was thinking about kind of peer influence on TikTok and the way in which it creates the necessity to be the perfect person eating the perfect meal at the perfect moment.
That's profound. Thank you for sharing that. Kate, did you have something?
Yeah, there's just so many examples I could think of. It happens all the time when students make connections that are surprising to me
Yeah.
between different classes, say, or just connect ideas concepts that we've addressed in the class in a way that I hadn't thought of before. But a recent example came to mind from a studio class that I'm teaching. I'm teaching a class called Devising, where we make ensemble-based performance not rooted in a pre-existing text, but based on other things, a question, a different kind of prompt. The prompt I gave the students this day was we were thinking about topography, just the space, the path taken on the floor of the theatrical setting. And I asked them to each make a topography of their life story up to this moment in, under a minute. And then I put them in groups of three, and they had to combine those stories to make a single topographic performance coming out of the three of their life topographies coming together. All of them were surprising to me and wonderful. And this one that really stunned me had us out in the hallway outside of the performance space that we were in, and had us at the end and sort of created this beautiful frame, and the three performers moving forward and away and using the walls of the space in this way that was just such a surprise, and ended up being really moving. So anyway, that was a recent example of student blowing my mind.
Thank you. Michael, a little bit about the curriculum.
Sure. Okay. So our department, I think, has a lot of flexibility for people who are interested in the mathematical sciences, broadly considered. So our department has a math major, has a math major with a concentration in statistics, as well as a joint major between math and computer science. And oftentimes those students are sort of delving into some statistical ideas as well to get something of a trifecta. And the departments or the different majors have, a lot of sort of flexibility in what you can take. So, we have mathematicians and statisticians who study a wide variety of things, and oftentimes they offer elective courses. All of those can count towards the major. There's also a really core sequence, so that kind of starts with calculus and linear algebra and introduction to statistics. So lots of the fundamentals there. I think maybe the question was getting at transfer credits or AP credits as well. I'll briefly say that we do accept AP credits specifically for calculus. For statistics, it's a little bit less common for us to have students sort of test out of classes if they've taken AP statistics, just because that course doesn't actually have any of the computational components that we think are really central to an introductory statistics course. But our department always does placement conversations. So if you have sort of a unique experience through high school or some other means that has given you a lot of exposure to a topic, we're always willing to sort of sit down and talk with you about what it is that you learned in those courses and discuss the fundamental ideas and test you out of that, if that makes sense. Where here, like, a test is actually really just a conversation.
That's cool. Nathalia, we have a student who's wondering about opportunities for creative writers at Reed, specifically if the English major is mostly analytical or if there are other courses that focus on creating literature and writing as well.
Yeah, we have two full-time creative writers. We have a poet and a fiction person, and students can take creative writing workshops throughout the 4 years. They can also apply to write a creative thesis. And in that case, they produce a thesis, which is a novella or a series of short stories or a series of poems, usually with some kind of afterword or foreword that reflects on the process, and what they learned about themselves as writers during that process.
For Kate and Nathalia, how do you approach teaching students who might not be majoring in your subject, but are taking your course out of curiosity or because it's a requirement?
I would say I have so many students for whom that's true. The number of majors is relatively small, but our classes tend to be pretty full. Almost all of our classes do not have prereqs. We're really open to anybody coming in at any level, and we find that it really benefits our conversation to have people coming in with different interests and backgrounds. Theater is covers so much ground, the conversations just are really benefit when people are coming in with differing perspectives.
And I would say that the same is true in English and comparative literature. Reed now has minors, so you can minor in these areas. And that means, somebody's a biology major, but over the course of the time at Reed, they take 5 courses in English. Those students, I think, are, their ability to contribute to conference, to write papers, to read a text is the same as anybody who's majoring in English. And maybe I would say might say that in some sense the playing field is leveled by virtue of Hum 110, which is really a course in which students get a lot of experience interpreting and writing about very different kinds of texts in literature and philosophy and religion, in history. There are a lot of actual, monuments or artifacts, paintings that we study as well. This week we're looking at Buñuel's Los Olvidados, so a film, and that's a course that gives students a broad range of experience that really prepares them well for any other course they might take in the humanities, at least.
This is a question that, excuse me, I received before, and it was so open-ended, and I was so surprised by the answer. I'm going to ask you all this. It was something to the effect so what's the big deal with small classes? And I thought, I don't know, that's a really great question. Why is that a big deal?
I think the big deal with small classes is airtime. It gives every student an opportunity to speak, not just once, but twice, three times, four times. And that means, for example, that a student can say, earlier I said, and now I've reconsidered.
Hmm.
Or earlier I said, but now I have a question about this. Or you said, and can you elaborate on that? Or can we circle back to when we were talking about? And that, I think, those are all ways of participating in a conversation that really deepen that conversation and that mean that everybody, I mean, it really means that everybody can participate in it.
I'm going to build on that and say that it is also makes it so that I am able to be more attuned to this as a conversation that's developing over the course of a class period, right? So I've taught a lecture class, and it's just me speaking out at at 100 people. It's not a conversation, and there isn't the opportunity to engage with the material and parse it and speak it out in your own way or ask a question and then and kind of understand in the way that you really only can when you are kind of talking out an idea with other people. And I'm able to kind of get a sense of where people are. Oh, I'm sort of like picking up on a vibration over here that there's some confusion about this topic, or I have a sense that this person really wants to say something and they seem a little hesitant. But I think I can invite them in and then in fact, yeah, just they just not cold calling. I never cold call on people, but I'm pretty good at sussing out where people are, how they're feeling about it. Are they ready to speak? Are they feeling like, oh, I want to push back on that a little bit? And it just allows me to be a better facilitator when we are in the smaller classes.
Yeah, I think that, my classes maybe sort of take on the traditional like lecture structure, but in the small classroom environment, they really don't look like a lecture in the way you envision it. So for example, I'm teaching a course on mathematical statistics, and that means I'm kind of like writing out the board with chalk during the class. But in the small environment, students can not just wait for me to like turn around and see if they have questions. They can kind of shout out questions and ask them of me, and we can talk about them. Oftentimes, other students are standing up and they're at the board with me, and we're working through problems together. So it really doesn't look like a top-down lecture because it's so small. Like we're really a community, and we're working through the material together.
We had one of our religion professors on the other night who said, I had a class with six people and I drive a car that fits seven. So we did a lot of field trips and we hit the road a lot, or sort of renegotiating topics in class and having conversations about if folks are sort of getting that content. Does that resonate with you? Is it this idea of collaborative versus competitive, because I think colleges feel like they might fall into one of those two categories. Can you talk about what read is and what read isn't in terms of that type of atmosphere in the classroom among the students?
I'm really curious about what Natalia and Michael will say about this. I don't find my students to be competitive at all. I find them to be deeply collaborative and super supportive of each other. But I
Mhm.
guess I'm just wondering if it's because, as I said before, we're often in these environments where we are producing th projects together and we are treating each other as collaborators. Yeah. So that's my vantage point. I'm curious what you all think.
I would say both. And maybe there's a little, there has to be a little competitive edge for there to be really productive or fruitful collaboration. Um, I have, again, I'm talking about the lit theory course. I have students write for that course and then present their writing in class. And so 6 or 8 of them will be presenting work that they've written. Um, I was really fascinated to see that they wanted to read each other's writing before conference. So they agreed amongst themselves that they would all send their writing out to everybody. And I think, I mean, so maybe they wouldn't admit this, but I think that that has actually been very, very productive in terms of the quality of the work because they know they're writing for a larger audience than just me.
Mhm.
But it's also been really good for conversations about the content of that work because everybody's read it.
Yeah, I generally think that my classes are not competitive and instead are quite collaborative. Although I really see what Natalia is saying, and that sometimes when there's a sense of like wanting to sort of put your best foot forward, it really can create some serious productivity and really strengthen the learning. So one example of this that I think is maybe a little unique for a statistics class is when students work in final projects, I sort of intentionally make groups such that there's students who are coming from maybe a math or a statistics major, and then students coming from other disciplines, and maybe they work on a data analysis from the discipline of one of the students. So then they really have something to give each other in that relationship. But also something that happens is the students will engage in peer review, like what happens in the true scientific community, in which we submit papers to journals, and then other scholars read those papers and give us feedback on them. So I try to mimic that in the classroom, and that sort of leads students to learn something in the process of seeing someone else's work. And they also can give really good feedback from the level of someone who's at that same uh, you know stage in their educational journey. So I think that's really fantastic.
We've got time for a few more questions, so we can touch on these relatively briefly. Let's see, we just got one that came in. Is it common to see folks double major in very different fields at Reed?
I don't think it's common to double major because double majoring requires writing 2 senior theses. But it is very common, I would say now, to have a major and a minor, which is a great way of negotiating, bringing 2 fields together and even from different parts of campus, bringing things together. Yeah.
And I'll just add that I've seen recently a number of ad hoc interdisciplinary majors with the theater. So I have now a classics, we call it GLAM, theater interdisciplinary major, and a computer science theater interdisciplinary major. I think we have another computer science theater interdisciplinary major coming soon, sociology theater, religion theater, bio theater. And these have to be approved by both of the departments, and the thesis needs to, in some way, combine in a real way both disciplines.
Mhm. And so we have, combined majors, for example, history and literature major. We've got minors. We've got the ad hoc major. So there's different ways to put together your educational curiosity. And one of the things I tell students is other schools, you're interested in 2 things, so you major in these 2 things. And here it's a conversation advising with your faculty, putting together a curriculum to make sure that you acquire information. So that's kind of a different muscle for folks to think about. Can you talk a little bit about advising how we help people craft out their academic interest at Reed by their work, what they do with you?
Well, I would say ideally you have the same advisee for all 4 years. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way, but ideally that's the way it happens. And so, again, you meet with an advisee when they're in the first year, they're taking humanities, they might be taking sciences, they might be taking, they might be taking an intro art history course or a theater course. And I think talking with them about the contents of their courses, their reaction to that content, what interests them that surprises them, what they imagined would interest them that isn't so exciting anymore. Those are all parts of those are all aspects of a really vital and ongoing conversation. I think one of the advantages of the Reed curriculum, or the way it's set up, is that you don't need to declare your major until the end of your sophomore year. So there's really a substantial portion of time in which you can engage in some kind of experimentation and take things in very different fields, and maybe especially courses that you would never have had an opportunity to take in high school, like an anthropology course or a Chinese literature course. And that can very much help to both widen horizons, but also maybe in some sense pinpoint interests that you didn't know you had.
Michael,
Maybe
while
just
we're
to add on
chatting,
something. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. And when you're done with that, I'm going to ask you just to respond in the chat to one question that's specifically for you, reply to the whole group, but please continue.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to add on to Natalia's answer and say that I think that in advising a read, I think we're pretty attentive to sort of the big picture, but also the small picture, the little picture about what's going on in students' individual classes. So there's like numerous points in every semester in which faculty can sort of give comments or feedback on how a student is doing, and then the advisor sees that. And that's a really nice way for us to sort of check in with our students and make sure everything is going okay. And when there are struggles, we have opportunities to discuss them and find resources early on. So I think that's a really nice aspect of the READ model as well.
And Kate, thank you for responding to that other question. This is going to be the final question for everyone. One of our students is curious about the benefit of, we're in Portland proper. And, how do we leverage that for our different experiences? Do students find a lot of opportunity in the city? And the second thing is, when our families come and visit, they've got one thing to do while they're here. What are you going to suggest they do while they're here in Portland for fun? And Nathalia, since Kate and Michael are typing, I'm gonna have you answer first.
What are you going to do in Portland for fun? My favorite Japanese restaurant is Yoko's. It's an
Ooh.
absolutely fabulous sushi restaurant. Also, shout out to Shaking the Tree Theater. This is a wonderful small theater in the that created a new space in the kind of, well, it's not so new anymore, but in the industrial district in Portland, they put on phenomenal shows. They bring in people from all over town, professional actors and others, and every show I've seen there is um, really creative, does something that just kind of beyond the pale in terms of theatrical invention and creativity.
Love it. Thank you.
Can I give a shout out for a restaurant? I have a brother who has two James Beard nominated restaurants, and I highly recommend them. Um,
What? I didn't know
yes,
that.
yes, they are Gato Gato and Oma's Hideaway. And he draws from our background, our family background, and from Indonesia, and they are fun and delicious, and I highly recommend them.
Alma's is wonderful. All right, on my list.
I'm afraid that I'm sharing too much on this somewhat public forum, but I live in the neighborhood of Oma's Hideaway, so I'm a regular there, and I can attest to the wonderful smells coming out of their kitchen. It's a really really good place. Um, yeah, my answer would be I think that Portland has some incredible nature, not only in the area of Portland, but actually in the city of Portland too. I mean, there's wonderful parks, there's two rivers, beautiful sort of hills that have wonderful vistas and lookout points. There's so much good hiking and biking and swimming in the city, so I think that's really fantastic.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you. I am also in the Gado Gado neighborhood. I haven't stopped by yet, but I'll let you know how much I enjoy it when I'm there.
Good.
Well, I know Michael is still responding to the question, but in the meantime, I just want to thank you all for spending some time with our families, and I want to thank our families for taking some time to learn a little bit more about Reed. I know you're coming from, again, all over the world. I've looked up some of your names. You are in really neat places, and you decided to spend the evening with us. Just a reminder, for the next couple of months, we have just a wide variety of virtual programming because so many of our students are outside of Oregon or from across the country and so many other countries. We've got about 40 virtual programs coming up. We've got about 8 admitted student days here on campus. And then we're also going to be all around the United States at receptions with either parents or students or alumni. It's just a good way for us to meet you and to help you make informed decisions about where you want to be for 4 years. So if there's any information you don't have, there's no reason for that. Get in touch with us. It's our job to make sure that you can make informed decisions about your college choice. I wish you the best, and we will see you soon.